Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thursday, May 27th. You may have read something about this today. Crazy monetary operations by the Fed going on. I'm going to try to explain it. 458 billion of reverse repos today. That was a record, a one-day record. 458 billion, almost a half a trillion. A repo is a kind of a short-term funding operation. A reverse repo is the reverse of that. So in a normal repo, one counterparty would take Treasuries or some securities from the other counterparty and add reserves. Usually the Fed doing this with the banks. So in a regular repo operation, you know, they could be overnight, they could be a 1 week, 2 week period. They take, the Fed will take Treasuries or some securities from the banks and they'll swap it for reserves, cash balance, right? A reverse repo is the reverse. Fed will provide Treasuries in exchange for reserves, take out the reserves. So the Fed took out 458 billion in this operation today, and it's been going on all this month. So why is this happening? Well, it all comes back again to what I consider to be gross mismanagement of the banking system, the depository system. You have, and this goes all the way back to March. Remember with the SLR and the end of the exemption on reserves, so at the same time, you had two things going on. You had the Treasury continuing to spend high amounts of money, you know, with stimulus funds and everything like that. So when the Treasury spends, that results in cash balances building up in the banking system, you know, on banks' books, right? Reserve deposits building up. And those reserve deposits were subject to regulatory constraints. The SLR was the supplemental leverage ratio. Remember that? Like last year, last May 2020, the leverage ratio, the treatment of reserves in the leverage ratio was suspended. So it was not a problem. As the government spent and the Fed was conducting all these extraordinary monetary operations, adding reserves into the system because it felt like it needed that to provide liquidity, and we had the shutdowns and everything. Massive amounts of reserve build, ordinarily under the regulatory constraint of the SLR. The bank balance sheets get clogged up with reserves, then it's an impediment to lending, right? Maybe they can't take in more deposits. So that, and then what happened was in March, they ended that exemption on reserves in the leverage ratio. And that really came about as a result of political pressure. I think it was Senator Warren, Elizabeth Warren, who said, you know, she did not want the banks to have any special treatment. So they ended that. But in the meantime, you know, Treasury continues to spend as it has to every month to meet its payments, plus the additional spending with stimulus funds. And here's the other thing that is kind of wacky. The Fed has been doing 120 billion a month of asset purchases, so that equals 120 billion a month of additional reserves into the banking system. So they keep dumping reserves into the banking system, right? For what reason, I have no idea. And now they're forced to do these reverse repos to take the reserves out. So like a friend of mine said, why don't they just not do it in the first place? In other words, why don't they just stop buying the assets in the first place? If you're dumping in 120 billion a month, and that only leads to a situation where you have to now conduct these repos to take it out, hello, just stop buying the 120 billion a month. I mean, it's really lunacy when you think about it. But I mean, I could go on here all day. You know, the funny thing is, and I got to tell you, because 99.9% of the criticism levied against the Fed is all these people, they're printing money, they're printing money. And I've explained so many times how that just is not what is happening. I mean, when the Fed conducts monetary operations, when it buys assets, it's taking out one form of the dollar, which is a Treasury security, right? And it's adding another form of a dollar, which is a reserve balance. So if it buys 120 billion, it's taking 120 billion in collateral, which Treasuries are cash alternatives, and it's adding 120 billion in reserve deposits. So there's no net printing of any money, but yet these quacks, that's all you hear. They're printing money, they're printing money, right? Everybody, I mean everybody, not just the doofus, morons, but you got people, high-placed people on Wall Street and in the financial industry saying the same crap, and of course the media. But now they say nothing because they don't understand it. If there was a legitimate criticism, it would be what I just laid out. The Fed is pumping in 120 billion a month only to have to reverse itself by conducting these reverse repos. So why do it? Why do it? I mean, there's so many examples like this, and it's not just solely with Fed monetary operations. All right? Like, for example, the Fed buys government securities, right? What does it have now? It has like almost 7 trillion in total assets. Of that, I don't know, there's way over 4 trillion in Treasuries, right? The government pays interest on Treasury securities. So the federal government is paying interest to the Fed, and then every year the Fed gives it back. So like, let's stop the charade at this point. Okay? Rip up the securities. It's not necessary. The government is paying the Fed interest on its Treasury holdings, and then the Fed is required to hand it back. So what are we doing here, folks? What are we doing? And then you have this whole narrative out there about the national debt, when so much of it is held by the Fed itself, and it's just like this back and forth little paper game between the federal government and the Fed. It's like it doesn't exist. They could rip it up. So you have this stuff goes on constantly. But it cracks me up that, and I mean, a lot of these people have huge followings. I'm talking about the ones, they're printing money when they don't know what they're talking about. I would love it if once in a while they would come up with a legitimate criticism or some kind of concise understanding and, just explain that. They don't have it. They don't have it. This would be a perfect opportunity. Hey, everybody, the Fed's buying 120 billion a month, adding reserve. Think about this too. Why are they doing these reverse repos? Why are they taking the reserves out? Because the banks can't take any more deposits. Yeah, they're taking your little deposits because they make money off of that. But I mean, big time corporate deposits, money market funds, stuff like that, they can't. The banks are full up in terms of their balance sheet. They can't take any more deposits. The Fed has literally created a situation where our very depository system, which has the word deposit in it, can't function anymore because the Fed and Treasury, that's another thing, Janet Yellen, right? Hey, I did a thing on this a couple of days ago. We got to draw down the account. And all that means is dumping more reserves into the system. When anyway, you're coming up to the debt ceiling. I mean, keep the account at a high level. Anyway, it's crazy, folks. I just thought I should explain that. I'll probably do more of these. But yeah, that's what's going on. Anyway, go to my website, pitbulleconomics.com. Sign up for a 30-day free trial of MMT Trader. I talk about this stuff all the time. Bye.